Righto, let's now start focusing a little bit in on the period of 1954 to 1968, perhaps with a few more specifics and a few more terms that'll set the ball rolling for you as you attack the detail we'll do in other spaces in this unit. As we go through this information, remember, it's very important for you to know you're not going to get every answer, every understanding you need from a video such as this. So write down your questions. Make a few notes as you go along. Don't be afraid to hit pause, to rewind, to play ideas twice. I'm just having a conversation with you. This information is unscripted. The idea is for me to be able to talk to you in a way that you can get your head around some ideas and then explore further. This video is going to throw a whole stack of terms at you, a whole stack of ideas at you. You're expected to take them further. I'm also going to throw a few sources at you as we go along here. Give you a few ideas of where you might find information, primary sources, secondary sources, that are high quality as you do your research. And source work in a unit like this really matters. Your evaluation really matters. We need to get our head around the authority of sources, how reliable these sources are. Are they representative of the views of other historians, or are they a bit of an outlier? So let's explore it a little bit now and some of our concepts. And first we're going to start with the geography. Have a look at this map from Nigel Ritchie's book. Again, Nigel Ritchie's book in the All Hallows Library. It's something you can probably access online. It's certainly something that I know turns up in Trove, the National Library of Australia. There's probably online versions of this book in different schools around the place. All right, our map here demonstrates, again, the size and diverse nature of the United States, and the insert map will help you a little bit as well. Firstly, our map shows from the east coast to the west coast of the United States. But when we talk about civil rights history between 1954 and 1968, most of the civil rights actions, most of the big demonstrations, much of the unit that we're going to be studying, occurs in what's called the South. And by the South, we often mean the Southeast. Have a look at the names of those states. Have a look at the few cities that are marked there. I'm going to throw a few of these, I'm going to highlight a few of them to you to make sure that you recognise the perhaps most significant. When we study the civil rights, it's really worth knowing where Arkansas, not Arkansas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia are. In many respects, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia are referred to, alongside Louisiana, as the Deep South. Okay, so these are some of our main states in the South. When we're studying the civil rights, we also need to know the location of a number of very important cities and towns. So Little Rock, Arkansas really matters in our course. Montgomery, Alabama, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama will matter in our studies. These are examples of cities where significant events happened in the civil rights. But the civil rights movement was taking place right across the United States. But perhaps some of the most significant, most important, most memorable events for a course such as ours happen in the South. And just as an example of that spread, Greensboro in North Carolina is right up near the border of Virginia, not far, really, from the north when we head into the United States. And remember, the north is the northeast. So having a sense of where these locations are matters. Okay, so getting a sense of where Los Angeles is, where San Francisco is, where New York is on this map helps. Also, what's interesting is Nigel Ritchie has a smaller map that I've grabbed for you and put alongside this that indicates the, I guess, where people of colour in the United States live. And we struggle to politically refer to African Americans appropriately often in this unit. So when we say people of colour in the United States, It's referring also to people of Hispanic background, of African American background, of not white background. People of colour, but sometimes there's black and brown. But we have a whole question of whether even words like black and brown are appropriate here as alternatives to white Americans. So in the United States context, the language we use really matters. We'll be studying in this unit some quite racist actions, and we'll run across some racist language. For example, some of you might be aware of the N-word that has been reclaimed by a lot of African American artists, perhaps in hip-hop, in urban music, where some people are allowed to use this language, but others should never use it. There have been quite a lot of high-profile resignations and firings of people who are of white background using language that's inappropriate around race in the United States. And this is something that we as historians need to be aware of and choose our language appropriately. Sometimes we'll get it right, sometimes we won't. But we need to be conscious of racial sensitivities in a unit such as this. When I'm looking at that smaller map, Ritchie describes largely African American areas as non-white areas. When we look at the South, you can see Louisiana, 30 to 40%. Mississippi, 30 to 40%. Georgia, 30-40% of the population in the late 20th century is non-white. By that, we can interpret perhaps that he's largely saying African American in those regions. When we move into Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, the racial mix changes. And that's part of the American story. But certainly in areas like Texas, California, New Mexico, and I'd assume Arizona, though I'm not as aware of Arizona's history, part of that racial non-white mix is Hispanics, people of Spanish origin, Mexican origin, and so on. So the mix of population and race matters, okay? And it's worth seeing this on a map, having a sense of the different types of nation or different types of ethnicities that make up the American nation. Let's now put a time frame around it. We've put a geographic frame around it. We've set some of the historical context in terms of major documents. Let's now look at a bit of a timeline. Now, have a look at the source here. This might be a useful one for you to find. It will turn up in other resources. The hyperlinks are much more accessible there, but it is well worth you being aware of this source. On this source, we can see our start date, 1954. Rightly or wrongly, this is the date we are choosing as the starting point of our civil rights study. Okay? We could perhaps argue that the American Civil Rights Movement commenced in 1776 and continues to this day. But we've picked 1954 because that was a landmark legal case of Brown versus Board of Education. And we need to spend some time looking at it. We end our unit of study in 1968. We choose that date because it's the assassination of Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Perhaps one of the great leaders of the movement, certainly a leader of the non-violence aspect of the civil rights movement, which had its opponents and its proponents. So we've got our two marker events, our bookends to our study, if you like, here. As we look at this period, we can see, if you like, different phases. We look at 1950s, 1955, 56, 57, as a time where we have certain key events around desegregation. We have the Montgomery bus boycott, the Little Rock 9, desegregation of schools, and we've got to grapple with the word desegregation. We've got the very famous murder of Emmett Till, which becomes an important catalyst for the civil rights movement. Then, by the 1960s, we move into a new phase. Out of the Montgomery bus boycott and Little Rock 9 desegregation of schools, we see sit-in campaigns, we see freedom rides about voter registration in some of those areas that have got large non-white populations. We've got protests starting to take place in different cities, such as Birmingham, in Greensboro, other locations. By the mid-1960s, we actually see some legislation starting to take place. We've got the very famous March on Washington. We've got the Civil Rights Act. We've got the assassination, the murder of another civil rights leader, Malcolm X. We've got the Selma, Alabama protests taking place in 1965, but also the passage of the Voting Rights Act, federal law that changes the civil rights movement. So this timeline gives you a bit of a broad scope of our unit of study from its start, for us, 1954, till the end of the movement we're going to study 50 years ago this year, at time of recording, 1968, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee. And if you need to go back and look at the map and see where Memphis is and so on, be aware of that. Okay? So, very, very important for us to have an overview, because we're going to plug into some of those events as we go along in this unit. In our unit, I've also mentioned already sources, and I've mentioned Ron Field's book. Okay? This book, really, really useful. I'm using it a lot. I like it. It's in the school library. There's like probably only one copy, so don't all rush for it, but you can also get it online. You can have a look around the place. Quite a useful book. Got some good primary sources in it and so on. I'm also going to point you to using online sources. And so this one from PBS, and you've got the link at the bottom of the screen, we'll have a little bit of a play with. What it does is allow you to access primary sources quite well. And you can see, as I go through here, from the slavery to civil rights timeline, it links to some primary sources, and we'll just adjust where it falls on the screen. But as it's playing through, we can select different topics, such as civil rights. We can see photographs related to different eras of American history. And when we go into each area, we've got specific photographs, imagery. It's, I guess, the information that help us understand it, such as this, a photograph of the Little Rock Nine. We can explore primary sources through some really high quality sites. Let's have a look at it again. This time, it's going to take us on a bit of a journey to see a photograph of Dr. King's very famous I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. You can see that there is information about all of these sources. There's some critical analysis, and it leads us to some really wonderful sites. So that's the first source I'd like to take you in the direction of. Let's now have a look at another. The Library of Congress. I have links to the Library of Congress in your OneNote. I would strongly recommend you make access the Library of Congress website. Huge amount of really terrific sites, and you can see that I'm exploring this in a little bit of a recording for you now. I will jump ahead into the video, but searchable, Civil Rights Era, you can put in other terms, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Emmett Till. It will take you into some fabulous sources on the left-hand side. If you wanted to pause and have a look, you can see different time periods. You can see different types of materials, whether they're newspapers, photographs, journal articles. In this particular case, I'm going into a timeline site, which gives us a little bit more information, and it has objects linked to the timeline. The US Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. is a delightful, divine resource that you really, really want to make use of. So we'll just leap ahead here. You can see the type of sources that come up. And I'll make this full video available for you at school. Okay, so you can just click through it and see where I'm clicking, following through ideas, the newspapers and so on. Okay, so lots of different sources on there for you. Hopefully that's of some use to you.